Well, Michael, look at us.
I know.
Saudi Arabia to Sydney, we have had a week.
Saudi Arabia, Sydney, and now I'm sweating.
And why
Sitting with the great McKenzie Pavacich, I'm very, very nervous.
Oh, I'm nervous. So we can get through this together.
We can do it. We can do it. Come on.
Well,
what are we doing here?
Well, we're going to talk about the main and the co-main event.
Of course.
Main event first. You have been in a rematch or two in your
have.
day. So when you think of the preparation for this fight for both men, what is it that they have to be most careful of in the approach to this fight?
Yeah, so like, when you go into a rematch, the first fight, there's a lot of unknowns. You know, you ask yourself, oh, this guy's supposed to hit hard. Can I take his shots? Can I stop his takedowns? Can I get back up? Oh, he's got really good jiu-jitsu. Will I be able to stop it? Is it as good as everybody thinks? So there's a lot of, I don't want to say anxiety, but that kind of gives you the idea of what I'm talking about. There's a lot of unknowns. This time, after you've been 5 rounds to a decision, a split decision, you've seen the best of each other, you know a lot of answers. You can take the shots. You can take him down. He can get back up and all this type of stuff. He can go the distance. He's not going to get tired. So it makes it an even harder fight. So when you're coming into this one, you're like, well, this guy really pushed me to my limit last time. And it was a split decision that could have gone either way. So whatever you did the first time, it's got to go up a notch. You've got to work even harder. You've got to take the cardio to the next level. You've got to increase your striking ability. The takedown, everything's got to improve. You've got to be a better athlete. You've got to be better mentally. You've got to be more confident, you know. So I'm expecting a ridiculous fight on Saturday. What was the original question?
No, you answered all of it, but I'm going to follow up with another question.
No, please.
Clearest path to victory for both?
Clearest path to victory for Dricus Du Plessis is to use his wrestling like he did in the first one. Take him down and then finish him by ground and pound. You know, Sean's very hard to hit. I sparred with him for many years when he lived in California. You know, and he has got an awkward style. You know, people talk about Dricus being awkward. Sean's kind of awkward as well.
They're not similar styles, but the way one has to fight the other.
Yeah.
In any scenario, but the fact that they're fighting each other, they're both very awkward styles that are kind of like hard to adjust to.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And Sean, it's hard to explain unless you're in there with him and you're trying to spar. And you're like, what are you doing? Why are you moving? What's going on? It's weird. And on the flip side, everybody says that about Dricus. They say that he's not very good or technically proficient, which is utter nonsense. The man's really good. He's got high-level jiu-jitsu, effective wrestling, brilliant striking, and he believes in himself. He goes forward, he swings, he bites down on his mouthpiece. Sean always talks about going out there and having these crazy wars, but then he goes out and fights methodically. That doesn't mean he's not a fighter. Trust me, it's just stepping into the octagon and fighting on these massive stages in front of the entire world. That takes tremendous courage itself. And whatever you've got to do to win, then you do that. And Sean's style, you've got to understand what your capabilities are and what your limitations are. So Sean knows his style, and his jab is one of the best weapons, so he uses it a lot. This time, though, he's got to follow up with it. He's got to use that jab as the key to the door to land in the right hand, and I think he's got to go for some takedowns of his own.
You talking about how people are a little critical of Dricus' style. I thought it was really interesting a couple of weeks ago. Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker sat down. They made like a whole YouTube video, and they were both saying, when you're in the octagon with Dricus, when you're in a fight with him, they were both like, wow, he's kind of slow. And they were thinking, there's no way any of this is actually going to work. And then it did work. When you're in a position like that where maybe you underestimated the skill too much of someone, and then you're in the fight, you have to make the adjustment, but you can't because their style is so awkward, and the belief in themselves and what they can do is so strong. How do you make the quick adjustments in order to not fall victim to
Well, you
style?
can't underestimate your opponent in the first place. Without bringing myself into it, but I'm going to. People used to say that about me. You know, all my contemporaries, when I was at light heavyweight and middleweight, were like, oh, Bisping sucks. Look at him. He's got no power and he's this and he's that. And people like Rashad Evans have said, oh, my word. They found out the hard way when they got in there with me. They were like, hold on a minute. He is good. What's going on? My coach said this guy sucked, but he's actually doing well. And I think that's the same thing with Dricus, except when you look at Dricus, he's finishing almost everybody. So how they come to that conclusion is kind of beyond me. Is it a little unconventional, a little unorthodox? Yes. Is it effective? Absolutely. I remember my old boxing coach when I was fighting Dan Henderson saying, oh, God, this guy boxes terrible. You got to box his head off. He couldn't box his way out of a wet paper bag. And then he knocks me out cold. You know, so just because something doesn't look overly pretty on paper doesn't mean it can't get the job done.
I asked that question because I wanted you to make it about you.
Yes, well, I make everything about me, let's be honest.
And
apparently.
And you know what? I appreciated that Rob and Izzy both gave him like his flowers and his respect. And it wasn't just them being like, oh, haha, it wasn't going to work. And then it did. They did then go on to break down his skill and why he was so successful. One more thing about Dricus, and I have to use my notes for this because I don't want to get the quote wrong. You love a quote.
I do.
So Dricus said on a podcast, am I still willing to die? Absolutely. That's a minimum requirement for being a fighter or being a champion, right? It's, are you willing to kill a man in front of his family? Yes, I am. And that's why I'm the champion of the world. When you think of mindset and his self-belief, but really the mindset in preparation for this fight, he said this about other opponents as well. What do you have to do when you're getting ready to fight someone who has that mindset in order to not be like outwilled?
Well, first of all, I love that quote. That tells you everything you need to know about Dricus. You do have to be willing to die because we're very lucky. This is a dangerous sport, but nobody's died yet because the UFC do such a great job with the medical background checks and all the rest of it. But that's what can happen, and a lot of things can go wrong. I sit here with injuries head to toe. Right? I've got multiple surgeries that are lined up still to go. On my wrist, I've got a torn labrum. I've had 3 on my neck and they still can't figure out what the issue is. I've got 2 total knee replacements. They rebuilt my nose with my ribs. The list goes on. I don't regret a single thing because this is what I signed up for and this is what I was there to do. And am I willing to kill another man? Of course you are. That's why when people say to me about my son, Callum said, oh, is he going to fight? And I always say this. You've got to be able to grab hold of another man that you've just beaten up, who's there, black and blue, blood pouring out of his nose. Grab him by the ears and knee him in the face as hard as you can and take satisfaction from that. And that takes a certain kind of person. And I don't think my son is that mean. You know, and I say that as a compliment. You know, I was brought up in the mean streets. He grew up in California with a swimming pool in his backyard. It's not quite the same thing. So, yes, you know, you have to be willing to do that. You have to be willing to go there mentally. And then because of that, because you know you're going to go there mentally, you have to train the way that you're going to fight. Because I got on my soapbox and I chatted for so long, I've forgotten the question.
No, you've answered the question each time.
Yes, okay.
So keep doing what you're doing. That's why we're chatting today. Okay, well, the co-main event. We've got Zhang Weili versus Tatiana Suarez. Now, Tatiana has overcome so many personal challenges. You want to talk about injuries. I think you can really talk to what she might be going through mentally and trusting her body in this fight. She's had a lot of injuries, had a lot of personal stuff. Now she has the opportunity to become champion of the world. What does she have to be most careful of mentally when it comes to not letting the injuries and the setbacks creep in this big moment? Yeah,
I think the fact that she's here and she's made it to fight week, she doesn't need to worry about any of that stuff. Now she's going to focus on the fight because it's now or never. You know, I mean, Tatiana Suarez has always had a tremendous amount of ability and she always looked like a future prospect and a champion, a contender, whatever you want to say. I remember calling her fights and thinking she's going to be a 2-weight division champion. I think she's going to take that title at 115. She's going to move up to 125 because she's big for the weight class. But to your point, injuries have really plagued her career, you know, and the lack of frequency when it comes to the fights has really damaged her, not only ability and ability to make money, but also her brand, her star power. You know, people aren't as familiar with her because you got to fight frequently and then people get on board. Against Zhang Weili, obviously she's going to use the wrestling. You know, I think she's at a big disadvantage when it comes to striking. She's a decent striker, but Zhang Weili is just way quicker and speed kills. She's bigger, Tatiana. You've got to use the wrestling and take it down and try and control her like that. Look for the guillotines, get mount, look for ground and pound. Will she be able to? I don't know. You know, I guess we'll find out on Saturday.
And experience is a big thing, too, for Weili. This is her 8th title fight in her last 9 fights. She's been there. She's climbed the top of the mountain. She's fallen off. She's had to climb back to the top. What she's had to overcome also can't be understated. So I think this fight is really exciting.
But as you say, experience in those big moments. Now, I fought pretty much main events throughout my entire career. Main or co-main event. I think in 29 fights with the UFC, I think I had 1 or maybe 2 where I was mid-card, main card, by the way. Never went on the prelims. Having said that, when I fought George St. Pierre, Madison Square Garden, I was kind of overwhelmed. And I'd had almost, we'll call it 26 main events or co-mains. You know, and even still, the magnitude of that event, Madison Square Garden, a legendary fight, a super fight, tons of people watching. I knew it was big on pay-per-view. And yeah, okay, I had one eye and I'd bust my ribs up and I had lots of injuries going on. And they're not excuses, they're just facts. But still, I remember kind of being kind of caught in the moment, you know, and that's what separates great fighters from greatest of all time, you know, from really good people to legends. You know, it's being able to deal with those moments, with the pressure. We always talk about gym fighters and pro fighters. You know, there's lots of guys in the gym that are really good, that I spar with them and I think this guy could be a world champion one day, but then they can't string a bunch of wins together on the regional scene, because when there's people watching and the pressure is on and it really matters, they fold. Yes, they've got the skill, they've got the technique, they've got the strength, they've got all that stuff, but mentally they crumble.